So when I got this Lincoln, the hood pull was stuck. So I had to fix that so we can open and close the hood. Bad news, hood latch will not pull. So we may be trying to figure this thing out, how to get in here. May try pulling on it some more, spray some stuff in there, let it soak, but it is not wanting to move. Now, what we did here on the Lincoln is, when I got this thing, of course the hood pull was stuck, and I got in here with some WD-40, it was stuck in, and just sprayed all around it, and pulled as hard as I could, and finally got this thing to pull out, and it undid the hood, and of course stuck out, because what happened is this square just rusted up in this plastic sleeve. And so what I had to do was, you can see how kind of pitted it is, but as far as it would come out, well, it was probably about right there or so. And I took and just cleaned that, sanded it down with sandpaper, a little bitty wire brush on the drill, and just worked on that, and just worked and worked and worked, and finally got it, shiny. And then I sprayed, tried to get my WD-40 straw in there, and sprayed on each side, and then sprayed the shaft, and I couldn't even push it in. I had to use a rubber mallet, and just gently tapped it back in. And then once it was in, pulled it back out, and I tried pulling harder. Each time I pulled it out, I'd pull harder to try to get it to come out just a little bit further. So as we're sanding and spraying WD-40, we're pushing it back in with WD-40, so it's getting some WD-40 inside this plastic. So when we pull it back out, it'll pull out just a hair bit further, maybe 1/8 of an inch further, and we can sand that spot clean. And I just kept doing that. We'd get it further and further out. In the meantime, what I also did is I came up under the hood. Let me show you. Unbolted the hood hinge, and I did spray that way, but I'll explain this mess in a minute, because this is not from me spraying this way. I unhooked this, and then I actually put this through here to make sure I didn't accidentally pull it too far, but that allowed it to come in further, so I could get that thing further out, because that square shaft is rusted further up in the plastic than it wants to come out. It's pulling the hinge or the latch all the way, but the latch is bottomed out, and there's still square metal in the plastic rusted up in there, and we need to get it as far out as we can to clean as much rust off as we can. So go back to inside the car. So eventually what we got to was right here. Now this is all the way out. We can't go any further. And we cleaned as much as we could, all four sides, spraying WD-40, and it was still, I could pull it out, but it would take, all my strength to pull it out, and I was having to hammer it back in. And you can see now, I'd call that perfect. One finger. Of course, we got no spring hooked up to it, so it's gonna be super easy pulling, but that's what it should be, with no spring hooked up. And so what I did, I judged how much I could pull this thing out. So I'm like, okay, I can pull it out, roughly 2 inches. So let's go slightly less than 2 inches in here. So that way we know when we're all the way in, we're on some of the stuff that we've cleaned, but when we pull it out, we are past what we've cleaned. And we could, if we want to lube it anywhere in this spot, all we got to do is spray in there. So took a little drill bit, just slightly larger than the straw on my spray can and drilled a hole just through the plastic, and that way I could spray in here. So I got it all the way out, and I sprayed in there until, you know, holding the straw in there, and I'd spray, and of course if I pulled the straw off it would shoot back out. So I sprayed in there and I held that straw holding pressure in there for probably 10 seconds, and then I'd pull it off and it'd bleed off a little pressure. It was sealing off in there, and that allowed it to pressurize and get fluid all the way around in here. And there must be a little crack or something right in here, and I don't doubt it, because I'm sure this, when this thing rusted, it swelled and probably cracked it, but because it would seep out right here. And actually I switched from WD-40 to fluid film at this point, and just kept working on it. And when I would go to push it in, I would plug that hole off, because what I found is when I would start hammering it back in, I was still at that point in time I was still having to hammer it back in to get it to go in. It would shoot back out this hole, but if I held it, it would come out here, and it was going all the way through the cable and coming out the other end of the cable. So at this point in time, so now, not only were we lubing this, but we have now pushed fluid film all the way through the cable. We have completely lubed the cable in fluid film. That's what the big mess of fluid film is at the latch, is from this. You know, I don't know if it was, you know, from just the spraying, you know, spray pressure, or from when we were hammering this in, you know, fluid was building up on this side of the square piece. The square piece must be at this point, you know, the square piece must be over here. So we're filling this cavity. This thing's acting like a piston as we're driving it in, and it was pushing that fluid film up the cable until we completely lubed the whole cable. I mean, this thing worked out great. So, and I just kept working it, and, you know, kept sanding and cleaning, and I would notice, you know, the fluid film would turn rust color. You can see all the that's rusty fluid film, and you can still see it's kind of a rusty color. So we just kept flushing it more and more. You know, I would wipe it like that, spray it more, you know, work it a bunch of times. It would get rusty colored like that. Wipe it down, spray it again, and just kept working it. And we've now got a nice hood latch, or hood pull, whatever you'll call it. And we got to clean up our fluid film mess. I put a towel down here to catch it, and that's all the stuff that is, you know, as we're hammering it back in, it's working its way out of here and dripping down. I mean, it was just going everywhere. So, worked out pretty well. Like I said, I did have to kind of hold this on. It does kind of spray back. You can kind of see how it... We've got it loose enough now that it really doesn't build up pressure. You can see how it did that though. But look at that, that is nice. And now we have a lube point. This is gonna be our lube point, because, you know, now that this thing has rusted, it probably will rust again. So maybe every oil change, I'm just gonna shoot a little spray of fluid film in that hole, and it will lube this thing up. Put a little grease zerk there. That would be funny. So, you know, we saved our hood cable. And to be honest, I'm gonna give props to Ford on their handle here, because I pulled out with some pressure. I'm talking about both hands wrapped around this thing, pulling as hard as we can to pull it out, and then having to hammer it back in with that rubber mallet, and we didn't break it. Pretty impressive. So if you've got one that's stuck and you can at least get it to move a little bit, and I spent several hours working on this, of just baby steps of getting this thing to slide out slightly more, back in, more out, back in, lubing and sanding each time till we got to this point. So a little bit of patience and a lot of time, and you can save stuff like this, because I don't know if I can get another one, or at least not new. Probably find a used one somewhere, but yeah. So thought y'all might find that interesting. If not, sorry you had to labor through this video, but yeah, we'll get to more interesting stuff on this car later. But it's this little stuff that just takes lots of time, because that's what it does. It just eats away at time. And so you come out here and you think, well, I'm going to do this, this, and this, 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 and this today. And what you end up doing is just fixing a hood pull. So thanks for watching. Leave a comment down below. Hit the like button and subscribe for more. Oh, and thanks Andrew for the fluid film.